guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Trisha and today on the Aspiring Home Cook, I'm going to share with you two of my favorite go-to recipes for party food or finger food or appetizers. These come together really quick and easily, and that's just what we need at this time of the year. Today I'm going to show you how I make my version of corn tarts. And the second recipe that I'm going to share with you is my take on a vegan version of pigs in a blanket. Both of these recipes require just a handful of ingredients and are super quick to put together. Now before we move on to the recipe, I wanted to share with you one little update. We are now on Patreon. If you've never heard of Patreon before, Patreon is basically a platform where you can support your favorite creatives and artists and content creators. I've chosen this platform compared to PayPal or others that are out there because on this platform I can actually give you a little something in return. There's multiple tiers that you can join up at, as well as perks at each tier. Now we're only just starting out there, so I'm quite eager to hear from you about what are the perks that you'd like to receive. By supporting me on Patreon, what you're doing for me is helping me devote more time and energy towards creating more content for you. This is not going to change what I share on YouTube. I'm still going to be on YouTube and I'm still going to share my recipes and my content with you like I always have. I'll leave a link to my Patreon page in the description box below for you to check out. So these snacks, let's go on over now and take a look at these snack recipes. We're going to start off by making the corn tarts now, and the first thing that I'm going to do is start off by making my pastry because that needs to rest for a little bit. For the pastry, I've got 200 grams of all-purpose flour or plain flour. To that, I'm going to add 100 grams of cold butter. Now this obviously is plant-based. I use Nuttelex because that's what I usually tend to have on hand. You can use your favorite plant-based version here. Irrespective of the brand, just make sure that it is cold. It can't be at room temperature. I've just pulled this out of the fridge and all I'm going to do is just cut it up into little pieces. Now this spread tends to be a little softer than regular butter, so I'm not going to chop it up with a knife because my hands tend to be on the warmer side and we don't want that butter melting. So I'm going to put those cubes in here and I'm going to start breaking that down using my pastry cutter. All this does is it breaks that butter or margarine into smaller, more manageable chunks before I can actually go in with my hands. Now if you don't have one of these, simply rub the butter and the flour together between your fingers like you'll see me do in a little bit. It'll turn out alright. Just make sure that you've cut the butter down into smaller cubes before you put it into the flour. With that done, I'm just going to now start rubbing that butter and flour together using my fingers just like so. And you're going to do this till all of those big chunks of butter break down and what you're left with is something that resembles wet sand. Now to this I'm going to add just a tiny bit of salt because that Nuttelex is not very salty. Now depending on the spread that you're using, if you think it's salty enough, you can omit this stage. If you're trying to cut down on salt, you can leave it out. But I've just gone ahead and put in just a tiny bit of salt to help season the pastry. And over here I've got about 2 tablespoons of 30 mils of ice cold water. I'm not going to use the whole lot. I'm just going to go in a little bit at a time and just see how much I need to just help bring this dough together. It won't take a lot. Now please note, over here I'm not kneading the dough, I'm just kind of bringing it all together and just pressing it all together to help it bind. I'm going to use just a tiny bit more. And you saw how easily that came together. I still have about 10 to 12 milliliters of water left. I didn't use the whole lot. Now, as soon as your dough comes together, you'll notice that it's still not very smooth. It's got cracks. That's fine. That's what's going to ensure that you have a nice crumbly and short pastry. That's what we're looking for. Now, all I'm going to do is just form this into a little bit of a disc. We're not going to start working on this just yet. This dough now needs to rest. So all I'm going to do is just place it in some parchment paper. I've flattened that down a little so that it cools faster, and I'm going to pop this in the fridge for about a half an hour now. While that pastry is cooling, we can actually start working on our filling. Now for the filling, I'm first starting off with some corn. I've got a cup of corn kernels here. I'm just going to add a little bit of water from a kettle that I've just boiled off, seasoned with a little salt. And I'm just going to turn the heat on and let this simmer just till the corn is tender. Now, like you can see here, these kernels have gone nice and plump. I'm just going to turn the heat off, drain this, run it through some cold fresh water, drain that off as well. Running it through that cold water will just help me stop that cooking process so that these kernels don't continue cooking. I've drained off that fresh water as well, and I'm just going to set this aside. I'm now going to move on to making my white sauce. Now for my white sauce, you guys have seen me make this before. I'm going to start off with a smidge of olive oil. This olive oil will prevent the butter from burning. Now into this goes about a spoonful of butter. This is a tablespoon roughly. And we're just going to let this melt for a bit. Once the butter melts, I'm going to put in about a tablespoon of plain all-purpose flour. Now I'm going to cook this off on a medium heat. I don't want that flour to be raw. I'm not looking for color or anything as such, but I'm just trying to cook off some of that rawness. For the butter in this dish, I've used some Nuttelex. Again, you can use your favorite table spread. You'll know when it's done because that flour is going to start smelling a little nutty once it cooks off. That looks good to me. Now over here, I've got some oat milk. And I'm going to go in with about, I'd say, half a cup's worth and just stir that through. And like you can see, that thickens up fairly quickly. Pour in the rest. In all, I've got 2 cups of oat milk over here. I'll just see how I go and add as much as I need. Now at this point, you're going to do your best to get rid of any lumps. If you think you need to use a whisk to help in this process, and you can do that as well. Now I'm going to season this off as well. Remember that Nuttelex has a small amount of seasoning. If you're using cheese, that will also have a little bit of seasoning, but I'm going to add just a touch of salt in here. Now ideally white pepper is best, but I've run out of mine, so I'm just going to use a touch of black pepper. This will come through in the final sauce, so I'm not going to put too much, but like this, it'll just be speckled with some amount of pepper, and I'm fine with that. If you use white pepper powder, it won't be seen. And I'm just going to go in with a pinch of mixed herbs. Maybe just a touch more. And we're going to stir that. At this point, I've got about a cup of oat milk in there. I'm going to add about half a cup more. So in all, so far, I've added a cup and a half of oat milk. I thought I would need to swap to the whisk, but this has started cooking off really nicely. And we're just going to gently cook this off till this thickens up just a touch more now. Now, before this is completely done, I'm just going to add a little bit of garlic to it and stir that through. I didn't use it at the start because garlic tends to burn, and I really don't like a burnt garlic flavor in my white sauce. And I've chosen to use garlic powder here today because it's a milder flavor than raw garlic in itself. And that has thickened up beautifully. Like you can see, that's almost a creamy consistency. And this will thicken as it cools down. I'm going to add the corn into this. Just stir this through. Remember, this sauce is going to thicken up. It's not going to be as fluid as you see it right here. And while this is still hot, I'm going to go in and grate some dairy-free cheese into this. Now, if you don't want to use processed cheese like I am, you can go ahead and use a little bit of nutritional yeast, but just bear in mind that the color of the sauce will change a little bit because of the nutritional yeast. Okay, I've got a couple of spoonfuls of cheese in there. I'm going to give that a stir, give that cheese a chance to melt and mix in with the rest of the sauce. In just a minute or so, you'll notice that that cheese melts into the sauce. At this point, all of our ingredients are in here, so go ahead, check for seasoning, check for salt, pepper or herbs, and you can adjust that as you need to. My filling is ready. If you have any extra left over, this is an absolute knockout when served with some garlic bread as well. Heat is off. I'm just going to set that aside till my tarts are ready to be filled. Now, with all that done, the only thing left to do is to make our tarts. I'm going to be baking these tarts off in my regular muffin tray. And to cut the tarts off, I'm using a cookie cutter that's just a little bigger than the actual cavity in itself. Now, there's a fair amount of butter or margarine in this pastry itself, so I'm not going to be greasing that cupcake pan. What I have here is that little bit of pastry that has been cooling away in the fridge. I don't want to work these multiple times over, so I'm just going to cut them into smaller portions, work with each portion at a time, and keep the rest refrigerated till I can get to them. I'm just going to use 2 sheets of baking paper and roll my pastry out between these 2 sheets because I don't want to add any extra flour. And using a rolling pin, you're just going to roll this out to a nice thin pastry. You don't want this to be super thin, but at the same time, you don't want it to be thick and doughy either. And that's the thickness that I've got on it right now. Now, it's up to you whether you want to use the fluted side or the straight side. I'm going to keep it interesting and use the fluted side today. Now, these bits, don't throw them away. We're just going to gather all the scraps from when we're done with rolling out all of our pastry and roll that out again. Is just set these in my muffin tray just like so. And while I do this, I'm just going to try and make sure that the shell is level, more or less level on each side. Now, this is going to go back into the fridge while I work on the rest of the pastry. So I'm going to have to get this in and out of the fridge a couple of times as I need to. Now, while you're working on these tart shells, preheat that oven so that it will come to temperature by the time you're done rolling out all of your pastry. Now, before I can pop these into the oven to bake, I'm just going to take a fork and dock this pastry or make little holes to make sure that this pastry does not bubble up and rise. Don't forget to get the sides as well. Both of these will go into my preheated oven and I'm going to bake them off at 180 degrees Celsius for about 20 minutes or till the pastry has cooked through completely. It's just really started chucking rain right now, so that's the noise you hear in the background. But these have just come out of the oven and they're done beautifully, with the exception of a couple that got a little extra done. I've only just started using this oven a very short while ago. I'm still learning it. Moral of the story, just keep an eye on the things that you pop into the oven while you're getting to know your oven better. Very carefully, I'm just going to pop these right out of those cases and set them out on a cooling rack. Please be very careful when you're doing this because your muffin pan is still hot. The tart shells are also still hot. Now, what I really like about this recipe is that you can choose to serve these tarts while they're still warm or completely at room temperature as well. All that I'm going to do now is put my corn filling in here and you're ready to plate up. That's how easy this is. Our tarts are now ready. We're just going to add a touch of color to this. You can sprinkle a little bit of chili flakes on top or even some fresh herbs like a fine dusting of either chives or parsley would work well too. And there you go. That instantly looks so much prettier with just that light sprinkling of chives and chili. I cannot wait to try out these corn tarts. Of course, I'm going to pick one with a little bit of chili. That's what it looks like. Apologies for the lighting. We've had a little bit of a storm rolling. It's been raining. Now it's just overcast and the weather's been all kinds of crazy today. But we're going to try out these little tarts. The pastry is so nice and flaky, and that sauce is just perfectly seasoned. So I hope you try these recipes out. If you do, don't forget to share a picture on Instagram and tag me at the Aspiring Home Cook. I love to see your creations. In the meanwhile, I'm going to go off and finish off this little treat. Today for my vegan version of Pigs in a Blanket, I'm using store-bought puff pastry. I use the Boggs puff pastry that you can find these at Woolworths. And I believe I've started seeing some version of this at Coles too, though I'm not sure if it's the vegan-friendly version. This one distinctly has a suitable for vegans tag on here. That being said, there's a lot of options on the market for puff pastry that are actually accidentally vegan. So just make sure that you have a look at the ingredient list to be sure of what you're getting. For my sausages today, I'm using these ones. These are the Linda McCartney's vegetarian sausages. Now these are suitable for vegans. I'm going to try and zoom in there. There we go. These also are labeled as suitable for vegans. And I've only recently tried these, but these are my absolute favorite ones. I've tried the plant-based sausages from Aldi's before. The first time I tried it, we really liked it, but I think they have since then changed the recipe. I'm not sure, don't quote me on that. But the second time around when we bought it, it just did not taste the same. So I've decided to just go ahead and use this. Another reason why I really love this product is the packaging is all just cardboard. I have opened this before, so I know what it's like on the inside. But in here, these are just fresh out of the freezer now. There's no plastic packaging at all. They're just packed inside these cardboard containers and they stay really well. I don't see why more brands don't take this approach towards their packaging. This makes me really happy. So yes, this is not a sponsored video in any way, shape or form. I'm just sharing some of the products that I've enjoyed using recently. Now before I start prepping my pastry, I've gone ahead and turned the oven on. My pastry, the packaging recommends a 225-degree oven, so that's what I'm preheating my oven at. I personally prefer to work with a pastry that has not thawed out 100% because it's just easier to handle. That's been a little difficult today because it's warm, it's humid, the weather's all kinds of funny, so please bear with me while I go through these. Now the package instructions for these sausages actually recommend them being cooked from frozen. So these have just come out of the freezer like I've mentioned before. Now your assembly process really could not be simpler. Pop your favorite sausages onto your puff pastry. You can trim these excess edges off if you want the sausages peeping through at both ends. At the moment, I'm just going to leave this as it is, and once I put them together, I'll then take a look at it and see if I want to trim them off. I'm just going to add a little bit of some hot English mustard. I love this with my sausages. Now remember, this stuff is hot, so you don't want to go too crazy with it, but I find that it adds a nice flavor, so I'm just lightly going to put some just on one side of the sausage. If you've got Dijon mustard, or if you've got the American mustard, that will work too. You can make this without the mustard, but I find that this adds a beautiful flavor to the end product. Now this next step is optional. You can choose to make these with cheese or without cheese. I'm using a vegan version today. And I'm going to crack a little bit of pepper over the top. I'm just going to cut that pastry down the center. Now at this point you can either use water. I've just got a little bit of oat milk here that I'm going to use to glaze the pastry. So I'm just going to use the same thing to seal the pastry off as well. And then carefully just roll the pastry over. Make sure that you're keeping it a little tight. Don't roll that too loose, so pull it back just a tiny bit before you continue rolling. And we're going to do the same with this one. Just get rid of that. And you need to make sure when you're baking it that you've got the seam side down. That will make sure that your rolls stay sealed. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is find that center. And cut that off. Now, over here it's up to you. You can choose what size you want. If you're making these for like a lunchbox prep or for snacks through the week, you can leave these whole. I'm just going to make these bite-sized. I'm going to knock off this extra bit like I said I would earlier. All that's now left to do is just transfer these to a baking tray. I've just lined mine with some parchment paper. Again, make sure that you've got the seam side down, and if they've lost a little bit of shape while you cut them, just tidy that up. The pastry is fairly forgiving. Once you've got all your little rolls on your baking tray, just lightly brush them over with a plant-based milk of your choice. Today I'm using oat milk. And one little flourish, I'm going to just sprinkle a few sesame seeds on the top. I'm using a combination of white and black sesame seeds today. You can lightly dab them in. These will go into that hot oven and cook up till they become nice and golden and rise up a little. And there we go. These gorgeous things have been in the oven for about 20 to 22 minutes or thereabouts. But again, each oven is different, so follow the instructions on the packaging and tweak the timing on the oven as you need to. And that, my friends, is what those vegan pigs in a blanket look like, all baked up and ready to go. They make a lovely addition to your party platters and tables, so go ahead, whip up a batch. Now there's really no graceful way of doing this. You know what puff pastry is like, so I'm just going to dig in. Let's dig in. These Linda McCartney sausages are so realistic. Even someone that eats meat will be hard pressed to differentiate or tell that these are vegan. Just one little tip for you is when you make these, make a nice big batch, more than what you think you'll need, because these, they're just going to fly off the plate. So you want to make sure that you have enough to go around. So guys, there you have it. These are great little ideas for when you are entertaining either this holiday season or through the year. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with family and friends that you think will enjoy it too. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll see you really soon with another delicious recipe. So till then, take care. Bye.